Our scripture today comes from the Psalter, Psalm 62, and we hear these words for us this morning. For God alone my soul waits in silence. From God comes my salvation. God alone is my rock and my salvation, my fortress. I shall never be shaken. How long will you assail a person? Will you batter your victim, all of you, as you would a leaning tower, a tottering fence? Their only plan is to bring down a person of prominence. They take pleasure in falsehood. They bless with their mouths, but inwardly they curse. For God alone my soul waits in silence, for my hope is in God. God alone is my rock and my salvation, my fortress. I shall not be shaken. On God rests my deliverance and my honor. My mighty rock, my refuge is in God. Trust in God at all times, O people. Pour out your heart before God. God is a refuge for us. Those of low estate are but a breath. Those of high estate are a delusion. In the balances they go up. They are together lighter than a breath. But no confidence in extortion. And set no vain hopes on robbery. If riches increase, do not set your heart on them. Once God has spoken, twice I have heard this. The power belongs to God, and steadfast love long belongs to you, O Lord. For you repay to all according to their work. May we pause for a word of prayer together. Gracious God, may the words of my mouth, the meditations of all our hearts, may we be strengthening, pleasing to you, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. This morning I begin with a quote. There's a woman by the name of Barbara Brown Taylor. She has been a preacher, she has been a professor, and is a writer. And she has written a book called When God is Silent. It's a small little book, pretty fast to get through, but I want to share a quote from her resource to share with you this morning. Silence has become God's final defense against our idolatry. By limiting our speech, God gets some relief from our descriptive assaults. By hiding inside a veil of glory, God eludes our projections. God deflects our attempts at control by withdrawing into silence, knowing that nothing gets to us like the failure of our speech. When we run out of words, then and perhaps only then can God be God. As I reflected on the nature of preaching about silence today, one of the directions I was thinking of with silence was about recentering, self-care, or what I might call soul care. This church, I would say, is extremely active in the work of justice. And sometimes we are out on the street corner with signs protesting injustice. Maybe we're going up and down the streets encouraging people to vote that haven't registered to vote. Or maybe we're showing up at a pride event advocating for LGBTQ rights and inclusion and welcome in our society. We could be personally advocating for issues around immigrants and refugees and healthcare, and the list goes on. And as we do this work, it can feel as though the powers and principalities of the day, it seems like the work we try to do, we're not moving anywhere. It seems like it's hard to make progress in this kind of work. At one point, we thought justice work were making steps in the right direction. And in current days, we feel like we're just trying to hold the line for it doesn't get worse, rather than trying to make things better. And one of the outcomes of that kind of hard work of justice, one of the things that comes with it is a sense of being tired or exhausted or deflated and feeling as though, are we really doing anything? Is it really making a difference at all? And in our exhaustion, we stop what I would call showing up, standing up, and speaking up. One of the counters to keep ourselves active and engaged in the world, to me, is what I would call the gift of silence. And for some, silence would be the last gift they would call it. It would be the last thing we would call silence as a gift. You know, Jennifer talked about our two kids in the children's moment today, and I'm probably like young Sarah, loud and noisy and all those kind of things. And that's just kind of the nature of myself. And quiet and peaceful, I can do it every once in a while, but it's not my nature to do all that kind of stuff. And so one of the things that's interesting about silence, Henry Nouwen, who is a well-written author himself when he was living, he talked about silence, and he said silence really has two sides to it. There is one side of silence that he would call the kind of more advantageous side. He called it the peaceful side of silence. Is that if we're in silence, there's a sense of peace. We can hear the birds chirping. We can hear the wind in the air. There's a sense that my soul is rejuvenated, and there's that type of silence. But now it says there's also the other side of silence, which he calls the frightening side of silence. And he calls it the frightening side of silence because when there is silence, we have to face our interior world and the thoughts we are thinking, and we have to be vulnerable with God in those moments. And sometimes we're not sure those thoughts need to be in our minds at all. We're worried about our fears and our frustrations, our angers, our disappointments, our shames, our guilts, that frightening side when we turn off the music and turn off the TV and turn off the noise and we have to face our interior world. We sometimes don't like the language that's in that interior world. And so Nouwen tries to kind of lift up this contrast between this peaceful side of silence and the frightening side of don't want to face what we have and what we're thinking about on the inside. Now, silence for me does not come easy. Many years ago, in 2012, I still remember the year, 2012, it was in October of 2012, I attended a retreat as a guest. It was a retreat for young clergy, and I got to attend and be a part of that retreat experience. On Wednesday of that retreat, early Wednesday morning, the leader of the retreat said, for the next 24 hours, we're going to practice the spiritual discipline of silence. I said, did you say 1 hour? No, 24 hours. And I was like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do with 24 hours of silence? I was scared to death of what I was going to do with 24 hours of silence. But what I ended up discovering in that space was my mind was racing like crazy. I started putting pen to paper ideas that popped up, things I was thinking about, challenges in front of me, things I was hoping to accomplish or do. And I started just writing stuff down. And then I'd get tired of the writing, and I'd go outside and walk on a nature trail outside the retreat center. I'd come back, and I had this flurry of writing and note-taking, and then I'd go and listen to some instrumental music. And I'd come back and write and comment about things. At the end of the 24 hours, I realized, I didn't realize at the time, I had this pages of material I had written down in that 24-hour period. And then in retrospect, I realized that 24 hours of silence gave me enough energy and enthusiasm for the next 8 years of ideas. I mean, it was crazy, all the things. I had all these things I wanted to do and accomplish. It just, this 24 hours kind of created this wellspring of possibilities. Like, oh, wow, I didn't know silence could do that. Now, it's not my nature to do that, but when I create spaces of silence, there is this internal renewal, and I fight through the struggles of the interior world of, you can't do this, or that's not possible. You would never get a hold of that person, or whatever it is. It's fighting through all that interior language to get to a place where positive things emerge out of that. Now, I will say, interesting enough, that in my work within Christian circles, I've had very few Christian thinkers, authors, exhibitors of silence help me out in really positive ways. Actually went outside my faith tradition to find a practice that helped me navigate silence more meaningfully, and that was in the Buddhist tradition. The Buddhist tradition has all kinds of practice around meditation, reflection, and silence. And so there was a period of time when I had conversations regularly with a Buddhist monk, and I said, I want to learn more about silence. And he said, what I want you to do is I want you to be totally quiet and silent for 5 minutes in the morning and 5 minutes in the evening. And I said, well, what if my brain won't turn off and I can't get to that place where there's not stuff in my head? Because I want you to keep a pad and a pen right there in that 5 minutes, and anything that enters your head, write it down and give yourself permission to let it go, and you'll think about it later. And I thought that was a really interesting practice to have, just to kind of write it down. Now, the first 5 minutes in the morning I practiced, I was waiting for the timer to go off. I'm like, how long is this 5 minutes going to go? I looked at the timer. Only 3 minutes had gone by. I got 2 more minutes to fill. I mean, kind of gives you a little sense of my extroverted nature. By the end, and he had me do this for 3 months. By the time I got to the 3rd month, I didn't even think about the timer. And I had less things I was writing on my pad. And I was allowing myself to absorb more of the silent space that I was in. And I think this practice, whether we know it or not, is in Psalm 62. It starts off, when we look at that psalm, it starts off with the phrase, "For God alone my soul waits in silence. I shall never be shaken." So the psalmist starts out saying, I'm going to practice silence as I pray. But then the psalmist immediately goes into requests and petitions and what about this, and what about this, and what about this? And we get halfway through the psalm and says, "For God alone my soul waits in silence, and I shall not be shaken." This psalmist is trying to get past the noise that's in that psalmist's head and get to a place of silence to rejuvenate who they are, to not let the exterior world so invade their interior world that they don't have a sense of self, a sense of renewal, a sense of soul about the world in which they live. And so we as individuals, as communities, this discipline, this practice, this experience of silence becomes ever more important for us in the work we do in the world that needs our efforts, our life, our sense of justice. So I'll give you 3 things, at least things for me that have been helpful in the process. In Western Christianity, which is most of what we experience in our Christian spirituality, is the side of we are doing the asking of God. In Western Christianity prayer, it is, God, I need this. God, I want this. We're making these petitions to God. That's the Western form of Christianity. It's advocating on our behalf to God so that God can respond to us in some way with our requests, our hopes, our desires. Now, there is a whole other way of praying in the Eastern Christian tradition, and that is not to talk at all. It's to enter in prayer and just be silent and not say anything. Make no requests, no petitions, and then you wait for a discovery of possibilities that emerge out of that silence. And I would say in my prayer life, about half of my prayers are the Western style. God, the world is in a terrible place. Help us do something about it. And then half of my prayers are, God, I'm here. Help me with what I need to hear from you. And just try to be quiet and shut up a little bit and see what happens in those prayers. So I would suggest in your prayer life to practice the Eastern style of Christian prayer that allows you to be a receiver in the prayer versus the asker in the prayer. Now, the second thing I'll mention is something that I kind of hinted at already, and actually Jennifer hinted at it with the kids, and that is the gift of nature for silence. By very nature, we have done ourselves a disservice by structures and buildings and cement and buildings, and we have squashed out all the nature around us. And yet nature is, if we really think about it, we enter into nature with a kind of a quiet demeanor. And we step out into nature, and the gifts of nature and silence, which is nature is not silent. But if we're silent, we receive those gifts in the midst of nature. Our kids get that at Tall Oaks when they go to camp. We heard that last week. 3 of our youth talked about Tall Oaks on the campsite. It's a beautiful nature space. And you go out there, and many of our youth find God in that nature setting. We had 40 women from our church were there this weekend for the women's retreat. My hope is if you were there, you found a time to walk a trail, to sit amongst the trees, to listen to the breeze, or something of being in nature that reminds us of the gifts of silence and the gifts of God. And we don't have to go very far. If you need to find a nature place, come to St. Andrew Christian Church and go to the north side of the property. Just go to this side of the property, and we've got numerous benches all around the property for you just to sit in silence. Except you'll be sitting in silence and you'll be hearing the noise of creation. I think Rick Hines said there's easily 20 plus birds that populate in this area. You can hear all the different sounds. And if you're here at the right time, you can hear all these different sounds. They're talking to each other. They're having this sanctuary bird conversation going on. I would love to have a translation of the birds of what they're talking about. But you have this beautiful conversation of birds up in the trees. And if there's a little bit of breeze, and you can't see breeze, you can't hear breeze, you can see the effects of the breeze with the blowing of the leaves and the rattling of the leaves. You hear all that stuff. And I would even dare say, take off your shoes and socks and put your feet on the grass. Just put your feet on the grass and feel the earth underneath you. All that is so important to allow nature to be a gift to us in the midst of silence. And if you need to not sit still and walk, it just so happens that our church property is connected to the city trail system. And you can walk down the trail, and if you walk east, which is better than walking, the west goes back toward through neighborhoods. Going east takes you out into nature. I've seen deer and coyote and raccoons and foxes and thousands and millions of squirrels, and you see all these animals, and just seeing all of nature around you. It's just this gift of not being a speaker, but being a receiver of the gift of nature. The third thing I would lift up in terms of a practice of silence is allow music to feed your soul. Not music that has words, but instrumental music. I've got this one piece on my playlist, on my Apple Music playlist. It's a 7-piece music of violin music with no words. I cannot tell you where that 7-minute violin piece takes me. It's this, I don't say a word, I let the music just feed me. It is a powerful gift to me. And so sometimes just say, I'm going to be silent and just wait. That's not easy. We sometimes need helps. Sometimes we need to bracket it with prayer. Sometimes we need to bathe in nature. And sometimes we need to submerge ourselves in music so that the silent nature of ourselves allows ourselves to be renewed and restored to recenter who we are. I'll finally say this about silence. Silence is not the absence of something. Silence is the presence of something. May it be so. Amen.